The moment I saw the champagne flutes, I knew. Not a suspicion, a knowing. The deep, stomach-dropping kind that doesn't ask permission before it rewires your entire understanding of your life. I was standing in the doorway of my husband's office, holding a bouquet of sunflowers and 2 round-trip tickets to Paris tucked inside a cream envelope, and the entire room was laughing. Balloons, a cake with white frosting, my husband Derek down on one knee, not in front of me, but in front of a woman I'd never seen before, a tall woman in a charcoal blazer who had his grandmother's ring on her finger and tears of joy running down her cheeks. I stood there for probably 4 seconds, maybe 5, long enough for Derek to turn his head and see me, long enough for his face to go the color of old ash, long enough for me to understand, with a clarity I'd never asked for, that I was not a surprise. I was an interruption. I set the sunflowers down on the reception desk, very carefully, the way you put down something fragile when your hands are shaking. Then I walked back out into the August heat. Let me back up 11 years, because none of this makes sense without the before. I met Derek Calloway the summer I turned 41, which means I was not a young woman who didn't know better. I was a grown adult who had already survived a bad first marriage, a foreclosure in my 30s, and the particular loneliness of rebuilding your life in a town where you know exactly nobody. I'd landed in Pelican Cove, a resort town on the Gulf Coast, with 2 suitcases, a $300 security deposit, and a job waiting tables at a seafood restaurant on the boardwalk called Dockside. That was 13 years ago. I'm 52 now. I've been working at Dockside for most of that time, and I say that without shame, because I am very good at what I do, and the regulars treat me like family, and the tips in peak season are genuinely nothing to dismiss. Derek was one of those regulars. He came in every Friday night during the summer, always sat in my section, always ordered the grouper, always left a 20% tip on the dot. Not generous, but reliable, which I came to understand was very much his personality. He was 44 when we met, a real estate attorney who had relocated to Pelican Cove from Atlanta after his own divorce. He was quiet in the way that reads as thoughtful, until you know someone well enough to recognize it as calculation. But I didn't know that yet. What I knew was that he remembered how I took my coffee, and that he laughed at my jokes, and that after 6 months of Friday dinners, he asked if I'd like to take a walk on the beach. Just us, no menu between us. We got married 11 months after that walk. Small ceremony at the county clerk's office, followed by dinner at Dockside, my restaurant, my people, my world. My coworker Priscilla cried. My manager Rod shook Derek's hand like he was personally approving the transaction. It was a Tuesday in early June, which is not a romantic day to get married, but the weather was perfect, and the light on the water was gold, and I felt, for the first time in a long time, like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. We settled into the kind of life that looks ordinary from the outside and feels quietly extraordinary from the inside. Derek kept his practice, which had grown steadily since he'd moved to the coast. Lots of vacation property closings, estate work, the occasional contentious divorce that he never talked about much at home. I kept my shifts at Dockside. We had a routine, coffee together in the mornings before I walked Huckleberry, our dachshund, around the block. Huckleberry was 7 when Derek and I got married, a long, slow-moving dog with a gray muzzle and the deeply judgmental expression that all older dachshunds seem to cultivate. He moved even slower now at 18, mostly deaf, mostly interested in sleeping on the cool tile near the back door. The vet had told us 6 months ago that his heart was doing what old hearts do, and that we should just keep him comfortable. We did. The house was Derek's before it was ours, a 2-story Craftsman 4 blocks from the water, with a screened porch and a live oak in the front yard that dropped leaves year-round regardless of the season. I'd moved in 2 months after the wedding and never fully shaken the feeling that I was a guest who'd been given permanent residency. My name wasn't on the mortgage. Derek had explained early on that it was cleaner that way, something about how the property was entangled with a business line of credit and that adding me would create complications. I had believed him. I was a waitress, not a real estate attorney. I trusted the person who was supposed to know. That was the first thing I should have looked at harder. I didn't. The second thing was the business trips. They'd started about 2 years ago. Derek traveling to Tampa, occasionally to Jacksonville or Tallahassee, for what he described as networking events and continuing legal education seminars. I hadn't thought much of it. He'd always been professionally ambitious in a quiet, persistent way, and honestly, his being gone 2 or 3 nights a month gave me time to myself that I'd grown to appreciate. Time to have Priscilla over for wine and bad television. Time to just sit on the screened porch with Huckleberry and listen to the palmetto bugs click against the screen and not have to be performing the role of wife. But last fall, October, about 10 months before all of this, something shifted in a way I couldn't name. Derek started coming home from those trips with a different kind of energy. Not excited exactly, more like contained, like a man carrying something he was being very careful not to spill. I asked him once, directly, if everything was okay at work, and he said yes, just busy, and changed the subject to what we were having for dinner. I let it go. I was tired. I'd worked a double that day, and my feet were doing what feet do after you've been on them for 11 hours on a restaurant floor. I let it go too many times, as it turned out. Valentine's Day fell on a Thursday this year. I had the morning off. Dockside doesn't open until 11, and I'd spent the previous week planning something I thought was genuinely romantic. Derek had mentioned, back in January, that he'd always wanted to see Paris. Mentioned it once, casually, the way people mention things they assume will never happen. I'd been squirreling away tips since November. Not a huge amount, I'm a waitress at a Gulf Coast seafood restaurant, not a hedge fund manager, but enough. Enough for 2 economy seats and a modest hotel near the Marais. A week in late April when the prices dip before the full tourist crush. I bought the tickets on February 3rd. I put them in a cream envelope with a card that said simply, "Let's go. Your wife." I picked up sunflowers from the grocery store that morning because they were the brightest thing in the floral section and because Derek had once told me roses were a cliché. I borrowed Priscilla's car because mine was in the shop having the AC compressor replaced, and I drove the 12 minutes to his office building downtown, which was a beige 2-story on Magnolia Street that housed his practice and 2 other small firms. The lobby was quiet. His assistant, a young man named Kobe who'd been there about a year, was not at the front desk. I could hear voices and laughter from the conference room at the end of the hall. The door was open maybe 8 inches. I pushed it the rest of the way. And there it was. The champagne, the balloons, the cake, the woman in the charcoal blazer, early 40s, striking, the kind of compose that comes from spending a lot of time in rooms where everyone is watching you. And Derek on one knee, holding her left hand, with the ring that had belonged to his grandmother. The ring I had been told was in a safety deposit box, the ring I had been told he was saving for something special. Her name, I would learn later, was Gwendolyn Marsh. She was the CEO of a property development firm that Derek had been doing legal work for. That was the networking. That was the Tampa trips. That was the contained energy and the changed subject, and every single thing I had looked at and decided not to look at harder. I set the sunflowers on the reception desk. I walked out. I sat in Priscilla's car in the parking lot with the cream envelope in my lap and the August heat, the February heat, because this is the Gulf Coast, and February here feels like what the rest of the country calls May, pouring through the windshield. My hands were not shaking anymore. That surprised me. They had been, in the doorway. But sitting in the car, I felt something settle into place that I can only describe as cold clarity. The kind you don't choose. The kind that just arrives when your brain finally accepts that the story you've been living is not the story that was actually happening. I picked up my phone. I opened the banking app for our joint checking account, the one Derek and I had maintained for household expenses, the one where his payroll deposited, and where I sent a portion of my tips every month, faithfully, for 11 years. I looked at the balance. I looked at it for a long time. Then I made a call. Not to Derek, to my cousin Nadia, who is a paralegal in Sarasota and who has, on more than one occasion, told me I needed to get my name on that house. "Nadia," I said when she picked up, "I need the name of a family law attorney, right now, today." "Donna," She knew my voice. She heard what was underneath it. What happened? I watched through the car window as Kobe, Derek's assistant, stepped outside the office building and lit a cigarette, oblivious, squinting into the February sun. Inside, presumably, someone was still pouring champagne. "I'll explain everything," I said. "But first, is there anything I can legally do with a joint bank account in the next hour?" There was a pause. Then Nadia said very quietly, "Donna, don't do anything until you talk to an attorney." I said, "I know. I'm asking what I can do." She was quiet for another 2 seconds. "In Florida, both account holders have equal access to joint funds. Technically, you can withdraw, but Donna—" "Thank you," I said. "I'll call you back." I ended the call. I sat there for 1 more minute, looking at that cream envelope with the Paris tickets inside it. 2 seats. April. The City of Lights. I put the envelope in my purse. I started the car. I didn't know yet what I was going to do about the house with my name not on it. I didn't know yet about the documents, the ones I would discover 3 days later when I finally got into Derek's home office and found a folder in the bottom drawer that made my blood go genuinely cold. Papers with my signature on them. A signature I did not recognize because I had not written it. A quit-claim deed, dated 14 months ago, transferring any potential spousal interest I might have had in the property. Signed, supposedly, by me. I didn't know any of that yet. What I knew, pulling out of that parking lot on a warm February Thursday, was that somewhere behind me, in a beige office building on Magnolia Street, a man I had trusted for 11 years was celebrating his engagement to another woman, and I had exactly 1 hour before he realized I'd been there. I drove to the only place I could think of, Priscilla's apartment on Oleander Street, 4 blocks from the water, up a flight of exterior stairs that always smelled like someone's dryer sheet. I knocked twice and stood there in the February heat with my purse on my shoulder and the cream envelope still inside it. And when she opened the door and took 1 look at my face, she didn't ask a single question. She just stepped back and let me in. I sat on her couch for 2 hours and told her everything. She made coffee. She didn't interrupt. When I got to the part about the ring, his grandmother's ring, the one he'd told me was locked in a safety deposit box, she set her mug down on the coffee table and said, "Donna, that ring was never in any safety deposit box." I looked at her. "How do you know that?" She pressed her lips together. "Because last June, when you were visiting your sister in Pensacola, he came into Dockside for lunch. Not his usual Friday dinner, a Thursday lunch, with a woman. And she was wearing something on her left hand that caught the light. I didn't think, I told myself it was probably nothing. I told myself it was a client." The room was very quiet. The window unit was rattling with the particular desperation of an appliance working too hard, and outside I could hear a lawnmower somewhere down the street. "Why didn't you tell me?" I said. I wasn't angry when I said it. I was genuinely asking. Priscilla looked at the table. "Because I wasn't sure, and because I thought I was probably wrong. I didn't want to blow up your marriage on a maybe." I understood that. I did. But understanding something and not feeling it like a splinter under your thumbnail are 2 different things. I let the silence sit for another few seconds, and then I said, "I need to make some calls." The first call was to Nadia, who by that point had already texted me the name of a family law attorney in Sarasota named Claudette Osei. I'd written the name down on the back of a receipt I found in my purse. Nadia answered on the first ring. "Did you touch the account?" she asked, before I could say hello. "Not yet." "Good. Claudette has an opening tomorrow at 9. I already told her the basics. She says not to move any money, not to move out of any shared residence, and absolutely do not sign anything." "I'm not in the residence," I said. "I'm at Priscilla's." There was a pause. "Donna, for legal purposes, you need to maintain access to that house. Go home tonight." "He's going to be there." "I know. Go anyway. And Donna," she hesitated, "document everything. I mean everything. If there's a folder, a file, a statement, photograph it with your phone. Do it tonight." I said I would. I ended the call and sat there looking at Priscilla's wall, which had a print of a pelican hanging slightly crooked above the TV. I'd looked at that pelican 100 times over the years, sitting on this same couch, and it had never struck me as particularly significant. Now it looked like the only stable thing in my entire field of vision. "You should eat something," Priscilla said. "I'm not hungry." "I know. Eat anyway." She made scrambled eggs and toast, because that's what Priscilla does when she doesn't know what else to do, and I ate them standing at her kitchen counter, because I couldn't sit still anymore. My phone had buzzed 11 times since I'd left the parking lot outside Derek's office. I hadn't looked at it once. I turned it face down on the counter and ate my eggs. At 5:30, I drove back to the house on Magnolia Street. Not his office, our house. The craftsman with the live oak and the screened porch, and Huckleberry sleeping on the cool tile by the back door. Derek's car was in the driveway. I pulled up behind it, and I sat in Priscilla's borrowed car for exactly blinded seconds, I counted, and then I got out. He was in the kitchen when I came through the front door, standing at the counter with a glass of water, still in his work clothes, tie loosened. He looked like a man who had been rehearsing something and had just run out of time to finish. "Donna," he said. "Don't," I said. "I need to explain. Derek." I set my purse on the entryway table, the same table where his mail had stacked up for 11 years, the same table where I'd put his keys when he forgot them, the same table that had my fingerprints on every surface and not 1 inch of my name on any piece of paper in this house. I was there. I saw the ring. I saw Gwendolyn. I saw all of it. There is nothing you can explain to me tonight that is going to change what I saw. He had the decency to not argue with that. He put the glass of water down and rubbed his face with both hands, and for one terrible second, he looked like the man I'd married, tired, a little lost, someone who had made something complicated out of something that could have been simple. I felt a wave of something that was not quite grief and not quite rage, but lived exactly between them. "I was going to tell you," he said. "When?" I asked. "After Paris?" He flinched. He hadn't known about the tickets. Now he did. I walked past him and down the hall to his office, the small room at the back of the house with the filing cabinet and the desk, and the window that looked out onto the side yard. I closed the door behind me. I could hear him standing in the hallway, not following, which told me he was either giving me space or calculating whether he needed to intervene. I didn't care which. I went to his desk first. The surface was clear. Derek was meticulous about surfaces, always had been. Another thing I had once read as thoughtful and had eventually understood as control. I pulled open the top drawer. Pens, a stapler, a spare charger. Bottom left, client folders, tabbed and alphabetized. Bottom right, the drawer I'd never had any reason to open because I'd never had any reason to go looking. I pulled it open. The folder was dark green, thicker than the others, with no label on the tab. I put it on the desk and opened it, and I stood there in the thin light of his office lamp and I read, slowly, carefully, the way you read something when you already know it's going to be bad and you're trying to absorb it without going completely to pieces. The quit-claim deed was on top, dated 14 months ago, which put it in December, before Christmas, before the New Year, before the February that had just happened. It listed Derek Calloway as sole owner of the property at our address. It listed me, Donna Calloway, as the party relinquishing any spousal interest. And there, on the signature line, was my name in handwriting that was a passable imitation of mine, but was not in any way mine. The loops were wrong. The D was wrong. 11 years of signing receipts had given me a signature I could recognize from across a room, and this wasn't it. I photographed every page with my phone. 14 pages total, including what appeared to be a notarized certification. I photographed the notary stamp. I photographed the date. I put the folder back exactly as I'd found it, closed the drawer, and sat down in Derek's chair, which was leather and expensive, and smelled faintly of the cedar spray he used on his suits. I was very cold. Not the room. The room was fine. I was cold from the inside out, the way you get when your body is processing something that your mind is still 2 steps behind on. He had forged my signature, On a legal document. A real estate attorney had forged his wife's signature on a quitclaim deed and then had it notarized, which meant either the notary hadn't actually witnessed the signing, which was fraud, or the notary was in on it, which was worse. Either way, what I was holding on my phone in 14 photographs was not a marital dispute. It was a crime. I sat in his chair for a while longer. Huckleberry scraped at the office door, and I leaned down and let him in, and he shuffled over and put his gray muzzle on my knee, and I put my hand on his warm, bony back and just breathed. When I came out of the office, Derek was in the living room, sitting on the couch we'd picked out together at a furniture store in Sarasota 7 years ago, the one with the slightly uneven cushion on the left side that we'd always meant to have looked at. He looked up. "I think you should sleep somewhere else tonight," I said. He started to say something. "Derek." I said his name quietly, the way you say something to a person when you want them to understand that you are entirely serious and do not have the energy left for performance. I found the green folder. The color that left his face was something I will remember for the rest of my life. Not guilt. He'd been guilty for a long time. What left his face was the specific physical terror of someone who has just understood that the ground they were standing on has shifted permanently, and they are no longer the one with control of where things go from here. He left. He took a bag. He didn't say anything else. I heard his car back out of the driveway, and I stood at the front window and watched the headlights disappear down the street. And then I sat on the floor next to Huckleberry's bed, and I called Nadia back. "I found a forged quitclaim deed," I said. "Notarized, 14 months old." Silence. Then, "Donna, that's not a divorce case. That's a criminal case." "I know. Claudette does family law, but she has a colleague who handles—" "I know," I said again. "Nadia, I need you to listen to me. I am not going to fall apart. I have been on this floor for about 4 minutes, and that is all the floor I'm getting tonight. Tomorrow morning, I'm going to Sarasota. I'm going to talk to Claudette, and I need you to find me the name of someone who handles real estate fraud in Sarasota County." She was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was different, steadier, matching mine. "I'll have a name for you by 8 a.m. "Good," I said. "One more thing." "What?" "Don't tell anyone in the family yet. Not until I know what I'm dealing with." "Of course." I sat on the floor for another minute after I hung up. Huckleberry breathed slowly beside me, his ribs rising and falling with the patience of a very old dog who has decided that wherever his person sits is exactly the right place to be. Outside, the palmetto bugs were clicking against the porch screen. The neighborhood was quiet. It was 9:47 on a Thursday night, which was Valentine's Day, which was the day I had planned to give my husband tickets to Paris. I got up off the floor. I went to the kitchen and I made a cup of tea I didn't drink, and I stood at the counter and opened the banking app one more time and looked at the joint account balance. Then I looked at the balance in my personal savings account, the one I'd maintained on my own, separate from the joint, where I'd been depositing small amounts since long before I'd had any reason to think I would need to. Not a fortune, but not nothing. I closed the app. I picked up the cream envelope from where I'd set it on the kitchen table, and I took out the card. "Let's go, your wife." I stood there reading it for a long moment, and then I put it back in the envelope, and I put the envelope in my purse, and I thought, I am still going to Paris, just not with you. My phone lit up on the counter, not a call, a text, from a number I didn't recognize, which meant it was probably Gwendolyn Marsh, because Derek would have known better than to text me directly tonight. I picked it up. The text said, "We should talk. I didn't know about you." I read it twice. Then I set the phone down, screen up, and I went to bed. I lay in the dark in the room that had my furniture and my books and my reading lamp, and not one legal document with my name on it. And I thought about what Gwendolyn Marsh had just told me. "I didn't know about you," which meant one of two things. Either she was telling the truth, in which case she was as much a victim of Derek's performance as I was, or she was lying, in which case she was trying to manage me before I became a problem. Either way, she had just handed me something. Either way, she had just handed me something. A direct line, an opening. I set the phone face up on the nightstand and stared at the ceiling of the room I'd slept in for 9 years. and I thought about that very carefully before I closed my eyes. I didn't sleep much, but I slept enough. The meeting with Claudette Osei the next morning took 2 hours and changed everything about how I understood my situation. Her office was on the 4th floor of a building in downtown Sarasota, clean and spare, with a view of the bay that felt almost ironic given the circumstances. She was a small woman in her late 50s, with reading glasses on a chain and the particular stillness of someone who has heard every version of every terrible story and has learned to hold them without flinching. Nadia was there too, sitting beside me at the conference table with a legal pad and her own pen, because Nadia is the kind of person who always brings her own pen. I laid it all out: the ring, the woman in the charcoal blazer, the folder, the quitclaim deed with the signature that wasn't mine, the notary stamp, the 14 photographs on my phone, which I emailed to Claudette from my seat at that table. She looked at the photographs for a long time without saying anything. Then she looked up at me over her reading glasses and said, "Mrs. Calloway, your husband is a real estate attorney." "Yes," I said, which means he knew exactly what he was doing when he had this prepared. "Yes," I said again. She took her glasses off and set them on the table. "This is beyond a divorce matter. This is real estate fraud, potentially forgery under Florida Statute 831, and the notary issue adds a separate layer. I'm going to bring in my colleague Marcus Webb. He handles fraud cases, and he'll want to see these documents." She paused. "Have you touched anything in that office since you photographed it?" "No." "Good. Don't. And don't tell Derek you found it." She looked at me steadily. "Can you do that?" I said yes. I meant it. We talked about the joint account. Claudette was careful here. She explained that in Florida, withdrawing from a joint account in anticipation of divorce could be characterized as dissipation of marital assets if it came before a legal filing, and that the last thing I wanted was to hand Derek's attorney a reason to paint me as the one acting in bad faith. "You keep depositing," she said. "You keep everything normal. You do not let him know you have those photographs, and you let me do the filing." I asked her about the house. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The forged deed is your leverage, but it's also your case. If we can establish that the signature was forged and the notarization fraudulent, the deed is void. The property reverts to marital status, which means you have a claim. But Donna, this takes time, months, not weeks, and it will require a forensic document examiner." "How much time?" I asked. "Filing the divorce petition I can do this week. The fraud case, that's a parallel track. Marcus will advise on timing, but realistically, 6 to 8 months before anything is resolved." 6 to 8 months. I sat with that number for a moment and then I nodded, because what else do you do with a number like that? You nod, and you figure out how to build your life around it. What I did not tell Claudette that morning, because I was still deciding what to do about it, was the text from Gwendolyn Marsh. I didn't know yet whether Gwendolyn was an ally or a complication. I needed to find out before I handed that information to anyone else. I texted her back that afternoon from the parking lot outside Claudette's building, sitting in Priscilla's borrowed car with the windows down and the February air moving in warm off the water. I wrote, "I'll meet you. Once. Public place. You pick the time." She responded in 4 minutes. A coffee shop called Perch on Palm Avenue, the following Monday at 10. I spent the weekend in a state of controlled suspension. I went back to the house Saturday morning. Derek was not there, which meant he'd found somewhere to stay, which I noted and did not feel anything particular about. I worked my Sunday shift at Dockside, because the bills don't pause for betrayal, and because Rod needed me on the floor, and because the particular rhythm of a busy Sunday brunch service, the orders, the tables, the familiar faces, the work of it, was the closest thing I had to solid ground. Priscilla worked the same shift. We didn't talk about it at work. We didn't need to. On the drive home Sunday night, Derek called. I let it go to voicemail. He left a message that was 3 minutes long, which I listened to once in my driveway. His voice was careful and rehearsed, which I recognized as the voice he used in professional settings when he needed to manage a situation. He said he wanted to explain. He said things were complicated. He said he had never meant to hurt me, which is the sentence that every person who has deliberately hurt someone eventually says when they need the other person to stay manageable. I deleted the voicemail and went inside and fed Huckleberry his evening meal and watched him eat it with the focused dignity of a very old dog who has not lost his appetite. I met Gwendolyn Marsh at Perch on Monday morning at 10 o'clock. She was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with a black coffee and her hands folded on the table, and she looked different from the woman I'd seen in the conference room doorway. Less composed. The charcoal blazer was gone. She was in a gray sweater, no jewelry, and the ring, his grandmother's ring, was not on her finger. I noticed that immediately. I sat down across from her. I did not order anything. I looked at her, and I waited. "I want to say first," she said, "that I am so sorry." "Tell me what you knew," I said, "and when." She held my gaze. "Derek told me he was divorced. 2 years ago when we started working together. He showed me he had paperwork, a dissolution of marriage certificate. I saw it with my own eyes." I felt something cold move through my chest. "That paperwork doesn't exist," I said. "I know that now." Her jaw was tight. "I found out 3 weeks ago. I hired a private researcher to do a background check, something I should have done at the beginning, before any of this went as far as it did. She found the marriage record, your marriage record, still active." She looked down at the table. "When I confronted Derek, he said it was a clerical error, that the finalization had been delayed, that it was almost done." "And you believed him?" "For about 48 hours, she said, "and then I didn't." I looked at her for a long moment. Her hands were still folded on the table, no ring. She'd taken it off before this meeting, which was either a gesture of good faith or the most calculated move in this entire situation. I genuinely could not tell which. What I could tell was that she was not performing distress. The distress was real. "The engagement," I said. "Valentine's Day. You knew before that." "I found out on February 9th, she said. "He insisted. He said he wanted to do it on Valentine's Day, that he would handle everything, that by the time we announced it publicly, the divorce would be finalized." I should have said no. I should have said we were waiting. I didn't. She paused. "I walked into that office and said yes, because I was stupid enough to trust someone who had been performing trustworthiness for 2 years. And then you walked in the door." There it was. The whole architecture of it, laid out on a coffee shop table on a Monday morning. Derek had built 2 separate lives with the same tools: the careful composure, the professional credibility, the quiet persistence that I had once read as reliability and had eventually understood as something else entirely. "I need to ask you something," I said. She nodded. "The property work your company gave his firm, how much are we talking about?" She didn't hesitate. "Over 2 years, roughly $400,000 in legal fees." "And is there any chance," I said carefully, "that he used that professional relationship to access anything about your company's assets, filings, ownership structures, anything that would give him financial leverage?" She was very still. "Why are you asking that?" "Because a man who forges his wife's signature on a quitclaim deed to strip her of property rights is not doing that for the first time, and is not doing it in only one place." The silence that followed was about 5 seconds long. I watched her process it. I watched the moment she understood what I was suggesting. Not about me, not about the marriage, but about her company, her professional exposure, the possibility that the man she'd been planning to marry had been treating her the same way he'd treated me, just with different paperwork. "I need to make a call," she said. "I know," I said. "So do I." I left Perch and sat in my car and called Marcus Webb, Claudette's colleague, whose number Nadia had texted me the previous Friday. I told him about the meeting with Gwendolyn. I told him what she'd said about the fraudulent dissolution certificate. I told him about the $400,000 in legal fees. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Mrs. Calloway, I need you to come in this week, and I need you to ask Ms. Marsh if she's willing to cooperate." I said I would ask. I texted Gwendolyn from the parking lot. There's an attorney handling the fraud side. He wants to talk to you. Are you willing? Her response came in 6 minutes. Yes. What happened over the next 4 months is the part of this story that moves fast on the outside and very slowly on the inside. Claudette filed the divorce petition on February 21st. Marcus Webb filed a separate complaint with the Florida Bar and coordinated with the Sarasota County State Attorney's Office on the forgery and fraudulent notarization. The notary, it turned out, had not witnessed the signing. She'd accepted Derek's representation that his wife had signed elsewhere and would come in later to acknowledge it, which she never did, because she never knew anything about it, because the whole thing was manufactured. The notary lost her commission. That part happened relatively quickly. Derek hired a divorce attorney named Prescott Hartley. I heard the name from Claudette, with the particular neutrality she used when she wanted me to understand something without saying it outright, which was that Prescott Hartley was expensive and aggressive, and that Derek was going to fight. He did fight. He fought the voiding of the quitclaim deed. He fought the characterization of the house as marital property. He fought the timeline on everything. The forensic document examiner Claudette had retained, a woman named Dr. Patricia Suh, who specialized in handwriting analysis and had testified in 43 Florida cases, produced a 14-page report stating with a high degree of professional certainty that the signature on the deed was not consistent with my known handwriting samples. That report cost me $2,200. It was the best $2,200 I have ever spent in my life. The bar complaint triggered an investigation that ran parallel to the divorce proceedings. I won't pretend I understood every step of it. Marcus walked me through it patiently, multiple times, and I took notes and asked questions and went home and reread my notes. What it came down to was this. Derek had used his position as a licensed Florida attorney to prepare a fraudulent legal instrument, had arranged for it to be fraudulently notarized, and had filed it with the county recorder's office. That is not a gray area. That is not a complicated interpretation. And when Gwendolyn's company's financial records were examined, she cooperated fully. Every step. There were billing irregularities that suggested Derek had been padding invoices for months, small enough amounts that they'd passed under the radar of routine review, but significant enough, in aggregate, to constitute a separate theft. He lost his license in July. The suspension was immediate, pending a formal hearing that would almost certainly end in disbarment. His firm dissolved within 3 weeks of the suspension. Like the 2 other attorneys in the building, had their own practices and their own reputations to protect. The divorce was finalized in September, 7 months after Valentine's Day. The house, the Craftsman with the live oak and the screened porch, was ruled marital property because the quitclaim deed was voided. I did not keep the house. I want to be honest about that. I could have fought for it, but I didn't want to live in a place where every room held 11 years of a story that had never been the story I thought it was. I agreed to a sale.